What Adrian Newey has just admitted is far more crucial than Aston Martin simply struggling at the back, because the real story is that the AMR26 started serious development almost 3 months later than its direct rivals, entered the wind tunnel in mid-April instead of January, and has been carrying excess weight ever since, forcing Newey into an aggressive recovery plan that could completely reshape the competitive order before the summer break. For months, Formula One fans believed Aston Martin's disappointing 2026 campaign was simply the result of Honda's difficult power unit integration. But Adrian Newey has now revealed that the technical crisis ran much deeper than unreliable hardware. The AMR26 was effectively born under impossible circumstances after serious development only began in mid-March 2025, leaving Aston Martin months behind teams that had already been refining their concepts since the first day the new regulations allowed work to begin. Every delay created another compromise, from an overweight chassis to incomplete aerodynamic optimization, while vibration problems between the Honda engine, gearbox and chassis consumed valuable track time that should have been dedicated to performance validation instead of basic reliability. But there's a catch. Newey isn't describing a failed concept. He's describing a project that never had the luxury of proper preparation. Melbourne wasn't simply a disappointing opening race. According to Newey, it became the team's brutal wake-up call because their first meaningful running only happened during free practice 3 after repeated power unit setbacks in Barcelona and Bahrain. That completely changed Aston Martin's philosophy, leading them to abandon incremental upgrades in favour of one massive aerodynamic and weight-saving package scheduled for Hungary. But what if that single upgrade isn't just designed to save Aston Martin's season? What if it's actually the first true version of the AMR26 that Newey wanted all along? Before we move on, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe so you never miss out on any of our latest videos. Because once you see how Newey's technical gamble connects Aston Martin's biggest weaknesses with a potentially massive turnaround at the Hungarian Grand Prix, you'll understand why the rest of the Formula One grid should already be paying very close attention. To understand why Adrian Newey is calling this situation a wake-up call rather than a disaster, you first have to understand how completely different the development timeline was compared to every major rival. Formula One's 2026 regulations represented the biggest technical reset in years, meaning the teams that started earliest immediately gained an enormous advantage in concept exploration, while organisations like McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes and Newey's former team Red Bull had already begun validating multiple aerodynamic concepts. From January 1st, Aston Martin was still assembling its engineering structure, integrating Honda into an entirely new factory operation, and preparing its first full in-house gearbox architecture. That difference was not measured in weeks, it was measured in months, and in Formula One development, every month represents thousands of CFD simulations, hundreds of wind tunnel runs, structural optimization studies, suspension packaging revisions, and endless simulator correlation work. That explains why Newey admitted something that very few technical directors would ever publicly reveal. Aston Martin did not begin serious work on the AMR26 until the middle of March, and the first wind tunnel model only arrived around mid-April. By that stage, rival teams were no longer asking basic questions about their aerodynamic philosophy. Instead, they were already refining secondary flow structures, optimizing floor edge sealing, reducing cooling drag, and searching for tenths hidden inside detailed surface geometry. Aston Martin, meanwhile, was still trying to determine whether its overall concept could even achieve the intended balance window. That single timeline difference changes everything, because Formula One development is never linear. The earlier a team identifies a weakness, the more opportunities it has to redesign surrounding components before homologation deadlines begin locking major structures into place. The later the discovery arrives, the fewer solutions remain available. Suddenly, every compromise starts stacking on top of another compromise, creating exactly the kind of engineering spiral Newey has now described. Look closely at what Newey actually said regarding weight, because this may be the most revealing technical confession of the entire interview. He admitted that when engineers are forced to design under severe time pressure, weight becomes the very first casualty. That statement may sound simple, but underneath it sits one of Formula One's most fundamental engineering realities. Every kilogram above the FIA minimum weight affects almost every performance category simultaneously. Extra mass hurts acceleration, increases braking distances, overloads the tyres during long stints, changes ride height sensitivity, alters suspension behaviour, and reduces overall aerodynamic efficiency because engineers are forced to compensate for the different vehicle dynamics. It becomes a vicious cycle where solving one problem unintentionally creates another. Now add Honda's vibration issues into that equation. According to Newey, integrating the new Honda power unit created unexpected vibration characteristics that demanded additional reinforcement throughout the chassis package. Reinforcement almost always means additional material. Additional material means extra kilograms. Those kilograms then require engineers to search elsewhere for weight savings, often forcing compromises in packaging, cooling layouts, or structural stiffness. Instead of optimizing pure performance, the engineering team suddenly finds itself fighting physics just to return to the FIA weight limit. This is exactly why Aston Martin's struggles cannot simply be blamed on one unreliable engine or one disappointing aerodynamic concept. The technical problems were interconnected from the very beginning. The power unit affected the chassis affected the weight distribution, the weight influenced aerodynamic efficiency, and limited testing prevented engineers from properly separating one issue from another. By the time the cars finally reached Melbourne, Aston Martin wasn't evaluating performance upgrades. It was still trying to understand the baseline behaviour of an unfinished Formula One package. Now, compare Aston Martin's situation with the benchmark every engineer inside Silverstone has undoubtedly been studying. McLaren. While Aston Martin spent valuable pre-season mileage diagnosing hardware integration failures, McLaren arrived with a package that had already gone through multiple optimization cycles. Their engineers weren't discovering the basic behavior of the car anymore. They were refining airflow stability through high-speed corners, improving tyre management over long runs, and extracting small but consistent gains from suspension geometry and floor evolution. That difference is enormous because Formula One performance isn't usually found through one revolutionary upgrade. It's accumulated through hundreds of tiny improvements that only become possible once the foundation is stable. Red Bull offers another revealing comparison. Adrian Newey himself spent nearly 2 decades building a technical culture where design deadlines were always driven by simulation maturity rather than desperation. Components only reached production after extensive CFD validation, wind tunnel correlation, structural analysis, and driver simulator feedback. At Aston Martin, however, Newey inherited an organisation that was still building many of those engineering processes while simultaneously preparing for the biggest regulation reset in recent Formula One history. That means his challenge wasn't simply creating a fast racing car. It was creating an entirely new technical ecosystem capable of producing one. Notice another fascinating detail hidden inside Newey's explanation. He admitted that the aggressive aerodynamic philosophy was largely pushed by him, but without enough time to investigate several alternative concepts. That sentence deserves far more attention than most headlines have given it. Normally, Formula One teams develop several competing aerodynamic directions during the early concept phase. One philosophy may prioritize maximum peak downforce. Another may focus on stability across different ride heights. A third could sacrifice absolute cornering performance in exchange for a much wider operating window that makes the car easier to set up across different circuits. Engineers then compare thousands of simulation results before selecting the strongest concept. Aston Martin never truly had that luxury. Instead, the engineering group had to commit relatively early to Newey's preferred philosophy because the calendar simply kept moving forward. That doesn't necessarily mean the concept itself is flawed. It means the safety net disappeared. Every unexpected aerodynamic interaction that normally would have been discovered during concept selection, instead, emerged after the car was already approaching production. This also explains why Newey carefully avoided calling the concept fundamentally wrong. He specifically stated that it produced challenges they hadn't anticipated. Those words are extremely important because experienced Formula One designers rarely abandon an aerodynamic philosophy after only one difficult development cycle. More often, they modify the supporting architecture around it until the original concept finally performs as intended. That brings us to the most important development of this entire story, the Hungarian Grand Prix upgrade package. On the surface, it sounds like another mid-season update that every Formula One team introduces. But when you carefully examine Newey's technical description, it becomes clear this is something much more ambitious than a conventional aerodynamic evolution. Listen closely to what he confirmed. The chassis architecture remains largely unchanged, and the gearbox layout also stays fundamentally the same. However, Aston Martin has removed significant weight from both systems, a process so extensive that it required the team to re-homologate the forward chassis and repeat crash testing. That is not a cosmetic modification. Teams only accept the enormous cost, engineering workload, and production disruption of fresh crash tests when the expected performance gain is substantial. Why does that matter? Because reducing weight is one of the very few upgrades that improves almost every performance metric simultaneously. Unlike a new front wing, which may only generate more front-end load, or a revised floor that primarily targets downforce, a lighter car transforms the entire operating window. It accelerates more efficiently, brakes later, changes direction with less inertia, places less stress on the tyres, and allows engineers to rebalance ballast exactly where they want it. Suddenly, compromises that were built into the original AMR26 begin to disappear. Now, combine that with Newey's second revelation, a completely new nose design and substantially revised aerodynamic surfaces. That wording is particularly interesting because Newey avoided describing the update as a simple floor revision or rear wing package. Instead, he referred to a broader aerodynamic redesign. In Formula One, changing the nose affects much more than the visible front of the car. It changes how airflow reaches the front suspension, influences the pressure distribution underneath the chassis, affects floor sealing, and ultimately determines how efficiently the diffuser generates rear downforce. A redesigned nose can completely alter the aerodynamic behaviour of the entire car. And this creates the biggest domino effect of all. If Aston Martin finally demonstrates that Newey's original aerodynamic philosophy works once the weight penalties are removed and the hardware integration is stabilised, then every difficult decision made during the painful opening months of 2026 will be viewed through a completely different lens. The early season won't be remembered as proof that Newey failed. It may instead be remembered as the expensive development phase that allowed Aston Martin to unlock the car he intended to build from the very beginning. If Adrian Newey's massive Hungary upgrade delivers the performance jump Aston Martin is expecting, the biggest surprise of the 2026 season may not be who started strongest, but who finishes strongest. So do you think this bold gamble will finally unleash the real AMR26, or has Aston Martin already lost too much ground to recover? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more exciting Formula One updates from this channel.